Okay, at this point, we're going to hear our first speaker, and that is Robert Owens, who's the chairman of the Constitution Party of Ohio. Robert is an alumnus of Ohio Wesleyan University, Oxford University, and Capital University Law School. He's a trial lawyer with offices in Delaware, Ohio. There's a bit of identity crisis there. I'm not sure whether in Delaware, Ohio, but it's actually Delaware, Ohio, where he and his wife Terry and their young son Kessler reside. Robert's a nationally recognized advocate for the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and a return to biblical morality. Robert has been endorsed by the Ohio statewide Tea Party PAC and numerous Tea Party groups around the state. In 2 races for Attorney General, Robert garnered nearly 400,000 votes, a vote total that has not been reached by a third-party candidate in Ohio since Ross Perot. Robert previously served as a prosecutor in Delaware County, Ohio, and is currently a member of the National Council of the John Birch Society, the state chairman of the Constitution Party of Ohio, member of the National Executive Committee of the Constitution Party, and county coordinator for the Campaign for Liberty. In 2010, Robert led a legal team that won a unanimous decision in the Ohio Supreme Court to force the Secretary of State to allow the Ohio Health Care Freedom Amendment to proceed toward ballot. Robert's a staunch defender of the American tradition of liberty, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and pro-freedom. Let's welcome Robert Owens.
They made the mistake of inviting a trial attorney to speak first to you today. I suppose that means they want to totally trash whatever schedule that they have.
We have a trapdoor under the podium.
Yeah. Having sat down in these seats earlier today as well, I'm mindful of the fact that the mind can only absorb what the fanny can endure. So therefore, I'm glad I'm the first speaker today. All right, we do have power. All right, so my focus here today is talking about the New World Order. And as politics go, when we talk about the Constitution, when we talk about the fact that we're a republic, not a democracy, I suppose that's the good, but I'm really going to be talking about the bad and the ugly here today as we go forward. And let me give an understanding of why we're doing that. Hopefully some of you have actually seen The Art of War before by Sun Tzu, famous Chinese military general. And we're going to apply some of the principles that he's got today. I want to highlight 2 particular principles. First principle, if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how little they are. You will lose every single time. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. So therefore, if you understand about republic, you understand what the Constitution is, but you have no idea as to how the liberal left agenda works, at best you're going to be 50-50, and I think we've seen that certainly in our experience. However, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And that's why it's critical to understand what we're supposed to be, and it's critical to understand who the players are and their tactics pushing us away from that. Lastly, all warfare is based upon deception, so don't think that you're going to have folks come out and say, yes, here it is, I am trying to destroy the middle class, because that's just not going to be the case. So we know that the United States is a republic and not a democracy, and we know that the government has few and defined powers, and so that really begs the question, how did we get so far removed from this foundation? I'm going to posit to you that there's really 3 schools of thought on this concept. First, evolutionary history. This is a Marxist concept. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. However, there's a number of great books out there sort of showing the fallacy of this. not the least of which is, anybody here familiar with the 5,000-Year Leap by Cleon Skousen? All right, yeah, see, that's about what I figured. Cleon Skousen wrote a number of other books. One of them was called The Naked Communist, and that, goes into, the evolutionary history issue. Second, maybe. Uh-oh.
Great speech.
Yeah, that's outstanding. All right, we've had a malfunction, Bob. It was, there we go. All right. Second is mistakes happen, and how apropos there, right? And here's the concept that, well, you know what we have are good, well-intentioned people in government, but golly gee, sometimes they just make a few mistakes, and that's why we've had this progression so far away from our roots. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to posit to you, and we're going to spend the most time today talking about this, purposeful design. That this isn't an accident, that this is a specific agenda moving us away from the foundations that made the United States the greatest nation in all of recorded civilization. So, mistakes happen, right? Well, let's see what James Forrestal has to say. They used to call it Secretary of War, but apparently that was too scary. So Forrestal was actually the first Secretary of Defense, and he says, these men are not incompetent or stupid, they are crafty and brilliant. Consistency has never been a mark of stupidity. If they were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor. And if you consider the logic there, it makes sense. What we have seen is a very progressive, a very short move towards socialism without fail. And make no mistake, we are playing the varsity team here, and we have to be prepared for that. So, they do talk about it, and, ego is always one of the big issues that these guys face. David Rockefeller wrote an autobiography in 2002, and I think, his statements here are really pretty genuine. It says, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global and political economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Now, I can tell you as a former prosecutor, what I find is that criminals love to talk. And I'll tell you what, I guarantee you that if you go down to the prison and you look at the people in prison today, probably 95% or more are in prison because they just couldn't keep their mouth shut. All right? And it's a pride thing. And in fact, shortly after this book was released, Mr. Rockefeller did an appearance on Charlie Rose on PBS. Some of you know Charlie Rose show. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations along with Mr. Rockefeller. And it's sort of an interesting exchange in which, Rose looks at the book, looks at Rockefeller, looks at the book, looks up at Rockefeller and says, why on earth did you write this book? And he says, you know what, I wanted to make sure that all my friends knew how important I was. I want to make sure that my family understands how influential I was in world affairs. I'm the guy that introduced Henry Kissinger to Anwar Sadat. I'm the guy that did all these things. And so it's an ego thing. It's a pride thing. And what do we know biblically about pride? Well, yeah, exactly. So that's their Achilles heel, and that's what they'll seize upon. So let's talk about their strategies here a little bit. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., some of you are probably familiar with this guy, has written a number of books, has gotten Pulitzer Prizes. If you've actually read through his stuff, it's really not particularly impressive. They give these awards out without any, actual merit to them. I think some of you, when you saw Barack Obama get the Nobel Peace Prize, you know, get some understanding of that. And that's to sort of fluff up their reputation so they can be seen in the general public as an expert. So Arthur Schlesinger Jr. was an officer in the OSS. That was the forerunner to the CIA. He was co-founder for Americans for Democratic Action, which was a radical communist front organization, was in the JFK cabinet, very influential in multiple presidencies. In the Partisan Review, the May-June issue of 1947, Partisan Review is a rather arcane academic journal. He is reviewing the communist effort in Soviet Russia, and he's really trashing it, saying, no, this will never work because socialism has to be implemented by piecemeal gradualism. It just isn't going to work any other way. But also we have to understand that if you have piecemeal gradualism, there's obviously going to be some opposition to that, namely the middle class. And so it's critical that the American people do not know what's happening or who's making it happen as we go through that piecemeal gradualism. And that's that aspect that we see. And when we talk about conspiracy, if you just look at the definition, we're talking about two or more people doing something in secret that's evil. Right? And that's just the very basic understanding. And he's certainly laying the foundation that they're trying to do this in secret. So Carroll Quigley is a very influential intellectual mentor, along with Schlesinger. Wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, amongst others as well, and he's very candid about this. He says in his book, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. Goes on further to point out that the argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound shift in policy. So if you've gotten the concept, and if you're in this room here today, you probably know there just isn't a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. And of course, it was engineered to be this way specifically. There we go. Probably can't see this. The names are a little washed out, but hopefully you can see that a number of the names here are bolded. All of those are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, to give you an idea of the penetration of this globalist movement into government. One of my favorite things when Chuck Baldwin was on the stump is that he started all of his speech by saying, the day that Chuck Baldwin becomes president, the New World Order comes crashing down. And I really appreciated that about Chuck, that he would actually talk about these things that are so critical. So, the best thing to do is to let Hillary explain to you exactly how this works. And this will also be a test to see if the audio really works.
Oh, thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have this far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Interestingly enough, the fellow that she was referring to, Richard Haas, he's the current president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He also served as the chief foreign policy advisor for Mike Huckabee in 2008. Now, we'll call this an open conspiracy, because it's not as though you can't dig for it and find the truth, but some efforts are made to conceal it. And to introduce that subject, I'll bring up Mr. Cheney.
and Vice President Dick Cheney once served as a director, a relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
And I've got to imagine the folks in Wyoming wouldn't be too happy with the globalist agenda put forward by the Council on Foreign Relations. So really what we have here are two retail outlets for the same institution. So we'll call them the Rockapubs and the Rockocrats. And for every Henry Kissinger, you'll have a Zbigniew Brzezinski, Newt Gingrich, Nancy Pelosi, Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton. They're all pushing for the exact same thing. They work for the same people. They are financed by the exact same sources. It is a lot like having a two-horse race in which the same owner owns both horses. He doesn't care who wins. John McCain or Barack Obama wouldn't have made the slightest difference whatsoever. That's right. It's the exact same people, right? And in fact, when you look at the host of folks in the GOP pool to run against Barack Obama, they're all connected to the CFR. Maybe with the lone exception of Dr. Paul. I don't think he's connected, but the rest of them surely are, and that has been the case for some time, as given here. And this will really smash some idols. That's David Rockefeller. It's a little washed out, but there's Ronald Reagan with him. There's a lot of apologists for Ronald Reagan, a lot of folks that say, well, he really meant well. I got to tell you what, he was their guy from the absolute get-go. That was the case. Remember, this was a fellow that was the president of a union in Hollywood.
Screen actor, too.
Right? So, I mean, we're not talking about, an innocent Snow White guy that may have been corrupted in politics. This guy was their guy right from the get-go. And just make no mistake about it. So some of their members have come out to let us know exactly what's going on. Admiral Chester Ward was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations for 14 years before he came out, and he was very clear what they were about. In fact, he toured the nation to discuss it. He says, the main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is promoting the disarmament of U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one-world government. In terms of tactics, he explains that once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of the CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound and discredit intellectually and politically any opposition. Now here, I think the best example that you can look at, especially in Tea Party groups, is the concept of man-made global warming, right? Absolutely bereft of any scientific basis whatsoever. But if you were to point that out and show their fallacies, well, you're labeled as what, like a Holocaust denier, right? That's the aspect of what they're talking about. And of course, you're going to see on CBS and NBC and ABC and CNN and Fox News and all these organizations where they're hammering you every night with this concept that the world's ending tomorrow because of global warming and that we need to just sort of roll over and play dead and let them do whatever they want to do. All right. So let me give you an example of media manipulation. Some of you remember this guy, right? Big smiles. Does that elicit a big smile for you? No, maybe not. So 7 months prior to the 1976 Democratic National Convention, what percentage of registered Democrats favored Jimmy Carter for president, or quite honestly even knew who the heck Jimmy Carter was? Right? We're talking just 7 months before the convention.
I believe the phrase was Jimmy who?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe this will work for me. 4%. Rather astute political observer Barry Goldwater made note of this, and in his autobiography, With No Apologies, he says, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski found Jimmy Carter to be their ideal candidate. They helped him win the nomination and the presidency. To accomplish this purpose, they mobilized the power of the Wall Street bankers and the media controllers. And this has played out a number of times. You know, another great example is Woodrow Wilson, right? Nobody knew who this guy was before he became president. And when you look at the campaign financing for his first run for president, just seven people financed 2/3 of his entire campaign. And all of them were connected with Wall Street. All of them would later be major players in the Council on Foreign Relations. And we've seen this play out recently. Before 2004, when Barack Obama got a limelight spot at the Democratic National Convention, nobody had any idea who this guy was. In fact, if you said Barack Obama, they might have confused that with Osama bin Laden and thought you were talking about a foreign terrorist. I don't know if we're not still talking about a foreign terrorist, quite honestly. Right? And so this is how they work. They choose their guy, they promote him, they bring him along, and then they hammer NBC, all of them. In fact, this guy was actually started showing up on game shows. Yep. Right? And, and they have, the pyramid and all that kind of stuff. That's how prevalent they push these guys. So Barry Goldwater also pointed out, to understand their tactics, the Trilateral Commission. And for our purposes, we can sort of use Trilateral Commission and CFR interchangeably. Understand they have different memberships and they sort of have different tactics pushing this goal. But for our purposes today, we can fairly use them interchangeably. He says the Trilateral Commission is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interest by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. What the Trilateral Commission intends is to create a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation states involved. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future. Now, we've seen, certainly the infiltration in political. From a monetary standpoint, if you're at all familiar with the Federal Reserve, this is the same people that control the Federal Reserve System. And it's a great name because Federal Reserve, A, is not federal. It's not part of the federal government. It's a private banking institution. And I think you're all probably aware right now that there ain't no reserves either. That goes in. But I think important to point out intellectual, and when you see the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and when you look at how they infiltrate universities and fund universities, right? If you're a school like Ohio Wesleyan, where I went to school, right? And you want, some grant money for research or this or that or the other, well, I tell you what, they get to start picking who the professors are. And that's how it works. When they take money from these guys, understand there are strings attached. I can remember when I was in my early 20s and I wasn't too bright on using money, and I'd have to go to grandma for money, right? There were always strings attached. Money comes with strings attached. Lastly, let me point out the ecclesiastical, and I think this is really the most significant of all four, and here's why. These guys understand that socialism is absolutely antithetical to biblical Christianity. There is absolutely no way those two things can coexist. Now, in other countries, they have tried to eradicate religion altogether, and it hasn't worked. So the goal now is to so pervert Christianity that it doesn't really matter. So you can have all the Joel Osteens you want, and it's just fine. Or you can talk about prosperity gospel, you can talk about all this stuff, and they don't care. One of their most prominent members of the Council on Foreign Relations in this field is a fellow by the name of Rick Warren. Yeah. Right? And if you actually look at what this guy writes, he denies the deity of Jesus Christ. And it's critical that we understand that, because biblical Christianity is absolutely under attack. And that is why we have to be aware of what these guys are doing and how they are doing it. So what's the motivation? A lot of times people say, well, why are these guys, doing this? What's this all about? And it's like, everybody on the CFR, are they in on this? How does this work? It doesn't seem logical that that'd be the case. And so let me explain it this way. At the top, you're going to have top-level operatives. And here we're talking about the George Soroses, the Rupert Murdochs, the Ted Turners, the David Rockefellers. And, some people will say, well, is it about money? And I will say that it's not. David Rockefeller has got all the helicopters he needs. He's got plenty of private jets. Doesn't need another yacht or another home. But what this is about is power. And let me explain power this way. Say David Rockefeller walked into this room and handed Frank this knife and said, cut Randy's throat. Now, you'd think the guy was nuts, and maybe he is, and we'd call the police, and the police would show up. They'd take him to jail. Now, David Rockefeller's a pretty influential guy. No doubt he has plenty of lawyers on retainer, and some of those lawyers probably know some judges. And I would guess that within a few hours, he's got some slip of paper that puts him back on the street. Nothing really comes of it. That's power. But let's consider this. Consider yourself in Red China, and Chairman Mao walks in. And he hands this knife to Frank and says, cut Randy's throat. Now, at this point, Frank knows it's his throat or mine. That's power. It's a whole different definition of power. And that's what these guys are after. I'm also mindful of, a professor of mine from college. He pointed out that one of the reasons he thinks capitalism works so well is that rich people have stupid children. And I suppose to a degree that's true. The idea here is that through government cementing of a monopoly of your family and power, right, it doesn't matter how badly your heirs do, the family tradition will continue. And that's what it's all about. Not just for now, but for all time. So at the bottom, you get the puppets. Here we're talking about the Bill Clintons, the George W's, the Barack Obamas, the mouthpieces of these administrations. And what they're looking for is, self-aggrandizement, ego, money, go along to get along. They understand the score of what we're talking about. They're shrewd people. And they understand that if you want to get reelected, these are the people you do business with. If you want to get money, if you want to advance, these are the people that you do business with. I suppose for Bill Clinton, you get an improved dating life, or whatever the case might be. So, to really make sure it's clear, at the top you have few, and at the bottom you have many. Right? Not everybody knows exactly what's going on. There's a small group of people that do, and the rest are going to go along because that's how they know they get along. So to really put it in perspective as to what their goal is and how they operate, here's Zbigniew Brzezinski. He says, we cannot leap into world government through one quick step. The precondition for eventual and genuine globalization is progressive regionalization, because by that we move towards larger, more stable, more cooperative units. And let me give you an example of that. I went to Oxford University, spent some time in Europe, in England, but also had an opportunity to tour the continent in between semester breaks. And what's rather remarkable as you travel through Europe is that we're talking about very diverse cultures, very diverse languages, diverse foods, diverse traditions, diverse religions, yet all of these countries have been amalgamated into one European Union. And when you look at their central government now, they just sort of stamp things out, and the national governments just sort of go along with them. To give you an idea of this process worldwide, well, we've skipped that slide, but let me give you David Rockefeller to introduce how they're doing that by building a form of consensus. Or not. So, of course, Americans would never go for this unless they were absolutely scared out of their mind. So the process here, and I'll bring up this guy. Anybody remember the shoe pounding on the table, right? The idea was to scare the bejeebers out of Americans, so they'll just be so busy hiding under their desks, they won't really pay attention to what's going on in government. Now, the problem was, this guy really was a nutball. And was so scary, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they actually came to the brink of thermonuclear war. Well, that's not what they're looking for. They're just trying to scare people, not actually have bombs going off all over the place. So there's a rather famous incident in October 1964 where David Rockefeller gets on his private jet, flies over to Moscow. They roll out the red carpet. The band comes out playing for him. They go into the Kremlin. There's a media lockdown for 3 days. He gets back on his plane, flies home. A couple days later, this guy's out. Brezhnev's in. Well, now that begs the question, who's the boss here? Right? And I would submit to you, it's not that guy. So, and we know part of this because, KGB agents have defected and have given us a pretty good view. This guy, Anatoly Golitsyn, defected in the early 60s, wrote a series of very interesting books, New Lies for Old and the Perestroika Deception. And he made very clear, now he was a senior KGB officer. He was in charge of their long-range planning division, and he pointed out that, hey, what we're going to do is try to bring people to the idea that the Soviet Union is dying, and that way we can merge them together. But don't be fooled by that. It's the same people pushing the same agenda regardless. Now, interestingly enough, when they decided that this was going to be the policy, one of the things that they decided was, hey, you know what? We still need to scare people. And so they actually convened a conference on Stone Mountain in New York, and they said, well, we could take a look at population control. We can take a look at environmental disasters to scare people. At the time, they were thinking global cooling would be the way to go, and some of you even might remember some of the articles on global cooling. But they said, you know what, that really doesn't have quite the sort of pop that we need to really scare the bejeebers out of people. We need a new boogeyman, so enter the new boogeyman, and it's this guy here. It's a little washed out here, so perhaps hard to tell, but maybe you can at least make out the little turban there. He also got a Nobel Peace Prize. That's his KGB handler right there, and of course we know these things because of this fella that came out. He was also a senior communist intelligence officer, actually a lieutenant general. And I mean, he was published in other places in the Wall Street Journal. Pointed out that he was Arafat's bagman, that he was carrying $200,000 a month to the guy, giving him specific instructions on Hamas and a number of other organizations. And understand that Arafat was no more Islamic than Mickey Mouse. Right? This is not about Islam, and this is not about radical Islamofascism or whatever they call it. It is about the folks at the Council on Foreign Relations pulling the strings. And likewise, this guy, Osama bin Laden, you're certainly all familiar with him. I would suggest to you he is but the mouthpiece, and that Ayman al-Zawahiri is in fact the true guy with the planning, the money, and everything else. This guy we know to be a KGB agent because his controller, Alexander Litvinenko, came out and exposed it. And for his efforts, you'll recall he was assassinated. In addition, Robert Hansen, some of you remember him from the news. He was caught, convicted of selling secrets to the Soviets. In particular, he sold something called Promise software, which is what the FBI uses to track money and material coming into the United States. He gave it to the Russians gave it to al-Zawahiri, and that's what was used to conduct the 9/11 operations. Well, went over a slide here, but Recently, there was published in Foreign Affairs, which is the journal for the Council on Foreign Relations, an article about the Tea Party. Very interesting from the standpoint that they say, look, we've got to do is make sure that our congressmen understand that they have to be better at lying to their angry American constituencies so that they continue to build what he calls a liberal cosmopolitan world order. Goes on to further explain that really we can divide the Tea Party into two groups. One we'll call the Palinites, and she's our controlled asset, so we definitely want to push people and encourage people in that direction. The rest belong to the non-interventionalist school. We can't do anything with those guys, so let's belittle and berate them and try to make them as insignificant as possible. And one thing I do want to point out is that there is a lot of internet garbage out there. So there's no lizard men from Mars, right? And if you've ever seen the History Channel, owned by Rupert Murdoch, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, he loves having this guy, David Icke, on, who talks about some of these things and then goes on to explain how they're shape-shifting reptilians from outer space, at which point... Yeah, at which point everybody says, oh, geez, and they want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's no Zionist plot. There's a book out there called The Learned Elders of Zion. It's garbage. There's no UN troops currently massing in Georgia, Ohio, or North Dakota. Some of you may have seen this video. I think the idea is that in Georgia they're building all these coffins, and they want to have you scared about coffins. Anybody seen that video with the coffins, right? Now, I don't doubt that eventually mass killings in concentration camps might happen, but I guarantee you when they do happen, you're not getting a coffin. Right? There's going to be a big bulldozer that digs a ditch and a big can of lye next to it. That's how that goes down. So don't for an instant think that that's the case. So distinguish fact from fiction, know the track record, multi-source the claims, beware of appeals to worse fears, and follow the money. One thing I did want to point out, this guy, Richard Gage, runs an outfit called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. When you follow his money back, you will see that it is tied to hard communist organizations operating out of Berkeley, California. This guy is a total fraud, and I don't suppose to know exactly what happened on 9/11, but whatever he says is probably not what happened. Now understand that if the opposition can get you to start circulating around a bunch of emails, right, what they're doing is they're getting you to discredit yourself. Right? And so that's why it's absolutely critical we understand fact from fiction as we go forward and make sure that we are telling the truth, because if you take yourself out of the fight with your friends and family, you're doing them a great big favor. So there's some wonderful resources to look at. We're running short on time, so I'll just point to a couple. The Shadows of Power by James Perloff, really well documented. The Naked Capitalist by Cleon Skousen as well. So if you're familiar with Tea Party groups and they use 5,000 Year Leap, Skousen's already a trusted brand for them. You can get that book on Amazon.com for like $10, and that's a great resource. One last thing that I want to end with, unfortunately, so many folks that talk about the enemy are purveyors of gloom and doom and really don't spend enough time talking about the hope that is in the world, the hope that exists for us. And I know myself, as I started, I used to be a hopeless neocon. I had a good friend of mine, sort of walk me through these things over a period of a number of months, most of which I was saying, Mike, you're totally out to lunch and at left field. And then finally I decided that I'd try to prove them wrong, started doing some research. I had to continue to pull my jaw up from the floor. I became very mad at my teachers and everybody else and rather despondent. Then got to the point where I thought, you know what, this is hopeless. It is all over. And at that point I really appreciate the change that happened for me when Mike sat me down with Scripture and said, well, you know what, let's take a look at the historical record to see if there's reason for despair. And here, for me, the big the light bulb finally went off as we're going through the book of Judges, chapter 7. Some of you already know that that's the story of Gideon. Right? Now, again, time's short, so I'll just point this out. What we see time and time and time again is when God does things for his people, his MO, his way of operating is always that he does them when things seem so bleak, that when victory does happen for his people, they know only because of God, only because of God was victory possible. And because of that, I take a look at and survey the battlefield today, and I look at the power, the might, and the money that the opposition has. Ladies and gentlemen, we have them right where we want them now. We have them right where we want them. And I'll tell you what, how special is it to be right now at this time and place to be a warrior for Christ, to be a warrior for the change that we want to see to restore the blessings of liberty that he has authored. That's a special time. I am so excited to be living at this time. And I'll tell you, when I go around and people ask me, Robert, what do you want out of your career? And I say only one thing, that when I die and I face my Creator, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And I commend you to that fight. Thank you all very much.